What is it that makes a team great? That is the question that many sports franchises have tried to answer with very mixed results. But for the Golden State Warriors, their MO, if you will, is to seek out the players who will give it their all, be at their best when they need them, and to give chances to the underappreciated or underrated. That's how they got their big three of Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green. And that's how they also got Gary Payton II to be the guy they needed him to be in the regular and postseason. Before the 2021 season started, about a year ago now, one of the most important role players on a club desperate to return to its dynastic reign, and the son of the legendary Seattle Supersonics guard Gary Payton, was preparing to apply for a desk job in the team's video department. Yep, believe it or not, it almost happened. Gary Payton II has had a basketball career full of rejection. He has been cut from teams 4 times in 6 years and spent 5 years toiling in the NBA's G League. And he'd just been cut again. Payton knew there was an opening in the Golden State Warriors video coordination department, so he approached assistant coach Jama Malalila. It was an opportunity, he thought, to still contribute and participate. "I was dead serious," Payton says. "If I get cut, I'm going to audition for that job. I was just trying to stay around. I'd still be around the game, I could still help, travel, whatnot, and then figure it out from there." But Malalila had other plans. "I just talked to him about the criteria for the video room. A willing learner, someone who can get on the court and still play, whatever." And he's like, "I'll do that," Malalila says. And I'm like, "Gary, I'm not letting you do that. There's no chance in the world you are going to do that. You are playing for this team." He wasn't wrong. He would go and play on the Warriors, but this latest speed bump was just one of the many he had dealt with in his life. When he was in the 2nd grade, Payton was diagnosed with dyslexia, a learning disorder that affects 10% to 15% of the U.S. population. Those with it often struggle with word recognition, spelling, reading comprehension, language, and visual processing. After nearly 2 decades of learning to adapt in the face of adversity, Payton was signed to Golden State's 15th and final roster spot 4 days after his conversation with Malalila. A reward of sorts for all that he had gone through up to that point. Dyslexia. When the Payton kids were young, their mother Monique made them read 30 minutes each night. Gary's brother Julian and sister Raquel had no problem completing the task, but Gary struggled and couldn't figure out why. Monique constantly heard him mumbling to himself as he tried to get through the pages. "Speak up, speak clearly," she implored her son, but no matter how many times she reminded him, Gary continued to stumble. When he was in the 2nd grade, his teacher approached Monique and suggested that Gary be tested for dyslexia. At first, Monique was defensive. She didn't want to think anything was wrong with her son, she says now. "I remember crying because I'd been so hard on him," Monique says. "I didn't realize he had a learning disability." Gary struggled to read. His brain often swapped letters, particularly D's and B's. When he was asked to read out loud in class, he tried to count ahead to which paragraph he would be assigned, so he could practice ahead of time and identify words he didn't know. He had a hard time learning the chronology of things, like the order of the seasons. 2 years after his diagnosis, the Payton family moved from Seattle to Los Angeles. On the trip there, Monique saw her oldest son crying on the plane. He said, "I don't want to be dumb," Monique says. I'm like, "Babe, you're not dumb. You learn differently." And he did, which would help him in times to come. Learning differently. Accepting this difference did not come easily to Gary, who says he struggled academically. "After I found out about it, I was more embarrassed to ask questions and speak out in class because my classmates didn't know, and I didn't want to hint to them that I had a disability," Gary says. "I just wasn't trying to be different than everyone else." Gary says he struggled to understand concepts when teachers explained them verbally. He says he often approached them after class to ask follow-up questions. Eventually, he learned to ask for the concepts to be written out so that he could see them. After their move to LA, the Paytons enrolled Gary in an academic tutoring program tailored to young kids with learning disabilities. Shortly thereafter, they learned their son was a visual learner, common for those with dyslexia. The news wasn't surprising. Gary always had a knack for picking up new hobbies after watching them a few times. "If you could just write it out and show me, I will get it," Gary remembers telling his teachers. He still does this today. When he needs to spell something, he has to write it out, even if it's in the air, or he will ask Siri on his phone. Gary and his mom, a former player herself, watched his dad's games together, over and over again. On his own, he'd watch other games and footage of other players. He'd study them, picking up parts of their game he liked. To this day, Gary says he incorporates moves that he saw from the late 1990s and early 2000s. Watching basketball, you can see it, Gary says. You can see what works and what doesn't. It's a really big help. I think it's easier for me to visualize something and then apply it to my game than the other way around. I try to watch as much film as possible. A sign of things to come, but as you might recall, he didn't get into the NBA easily, nor was he taken seriously as a player at first. NBA or bust. I wanted to get away from the sport because of who my dad is, living up to the hype, whatever. Payton says, I just didn't want to deal with it. But by middle school, Payton decided to give it a try. He was very lackadaisical, Monique says. I'm like, dude, we're dogs on the court. You're either in or you're out. Are you playing or are you playing? Are you serious? When Gary was a junior in high school, he decided to meet with Daryl Jordan, a family friend and basketball coach who was working with Julian in the AAU circuit. It was with Jordan that Gary's footwork and other fundamentals of the game started to improve. Gary received 3 scholarship offers from mid-major schools: Florida Gulf Coast, Florida International, and Florida A&M. But he didn't qualify academically. The voices from his childhood telling him he wasn't smart enough returned, filling him with doubt. Gary joined the Oregon State Beavers in 2014 and played an integral part of leading the Beavers to their first NCAA tournament appearance since 1990, becoming the first player to be voted the Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year 2 times. When he tried to get into the NBA, though, it was full of issues, and few, especially his coach who saw his talent firsthand, could understand why. It would all come to a head this past season. Because when the Golden State Warriors needed him in a season full of questions and doubts, he came through for them on the defensive end of the ball. He even got injured in the playoffs and came back to play big in the NBA Finals. The finals against the Boston Celtics was a chance at redemption. And while it wasn't a flawless victory, the Warriors won their 4th title in 8 years. Gary Payton II was a big part of that in certain games, and the love for him on the team was very well known, which made it all the more surprising when he became a Portland Trailblazer. It's true, on July 6th, the Portland Trailblazers revealed that they had signed Gary Payton II to a 3-year deal. We're very excited to have Gary join us in Portland, said Cronin. Gary brings an elite defensive acumen and championship pedigree that will be essential to how we play basketball. His competitiveness and toughness will accent Coach Billup's style of play. Many on the Warrior squad were not happy about this, including the Big Three. But sometimes deals like this happen, and now all we can hope is that he is able to be appreciated there like he was on the Warriors. So what do you think? What do you think of this look at Gary Payton II and how he became the guard that the Golden State Warriors needed to win yet another title? Do you think that he'll do just as good as a Trailblazer as he did as a Warrior? Just how much are the Warriors going to miss him in the upcoming season? Let us know in the comments below, and we'll see you next time on the channel.